Ready to open the hood? UseTool for the tutorials.
And for car parts, the right idea is the Mr. Auto app. Easy, fast, and with better prices than on the website.
You will find the sash shock absorbers used in the video through the link in the description. Turn your engine off. Pull up the handbrake. Pull on the bonnet release lever and open the bonnet. To disassemble the front shock absorbers, it is first important to remove the windscreen frame and the windscreen wipers. Before removing the windscreen wipers, place adhesive tape in order to keep a precise indication of their location at the end position. This will make it possible to correctly position them when reassembling. Remove the nut covers from the wiper arms and, using a ratchet and a 13mm socket, loosen the nuts. Remove the windscreen wiper arms by making small movements up and down. If they are not coming out, we recommend taking a windscreen wiper remover to facilitate the process. Take out the waterproofing joint on the windscreen bay by pulling it upwards from one end to the other. Remove the metal clips holding the windscreen bay. Remove the windscreen scuttle panel. For the other side, remove the washer fluid hose. Then, remove the second scuttle panel. Then, using a ratchet and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 3 screws holding the shock absorber's strut support bearings by a few threads in order to create some play for the next manipulations. In order to change the front shock absorbers on your vehicle, you must lift the front of the car and remove the wheels to have a complete access to the suspension system. Loosen the stud bolts on the front wheels. Raise the front of the vehicle and put it in the 2-axle stands. We strongly suggest watching the tutorial, raising your vehicle safely before carrying out this step. You will then be able to take off the wheels. Don't forget to slide them under the vehicle. During this operation, you will work on the steering system of your vehicle. Checks on tyre alignment, when carried out by a professional, will guarantee that your steering system has been perfectly aligned and is in good working order. In order to change this type of shock absorber, you'll need to remove the hub screw. We advise you to screw in 2 wheel studs so as to not break the screw holding the disc. Insert a thin flathead screwdriver that can slip in between the 2 sides of the disc. You have to insert it in front of the brake caliper mount so that it butts up against the latter. With an iron bar and an M24 12-point socket, unscrew the nut on the hub without removing it. As the components to be removed are very often seized up, don't hesitate to brush and to use penetrating oil to facilitate the operation. Now, using an 18mm spanner, a socket wrench and a 6mm Allen socket, release the holding lock nut on the tie rod. Use a ball joint extractor to detach the ball joint from the axle stub. You must now remove the ball joint attachment from the control arms. Start by brushing the 3 ball joint retaining screws of the control arm, then spray them with penetrating oil. Be careful not to get any degreaser on the disc. If you do, clean the disc using brake cleaning fluid. Unscrew the 3 fixing nuts on the control arms using a ratchet and a 16mm socket. Using a crowbar, pry the control arm out of the ball joint completely. You now have to remove the stabilizer link bar. It connects the stabilizer link so that the wheels are always in contact with the ground. To do this, we recommend watching the video How to Replace the Sway Bar Link Golf 7. Brush the screw on the shock absorber base and spray it with degreaser. Then, using a ratchet, an 18mm socket and an M14 hexagon socket, unscrew the shock absorber base nut. Then, remove the screw. Using a ratchet and a 10mm socket, unscrew the bracket holding the brake and ABS sensor hoses in place. Then remove it. Finish unscrewing the hub screw. Then remove it. Now you can remove the axle stop with a crowbar. Brush the bottom of the shock absorber and spray it with penetrating oil. This will help with future manipulations. Prepare a stable, elevated surface to place all of the stub axle once you've removed it. Using a hammer, slide a thin chisel into the opening of the stub axle at the shock absorber base. This will create a slight opening to help you remove the shock absorber with ease. Hit the axle stub to release the shock absorber base.
Please support us, subscribe and like the video, that will be really cool.
Finish removing the screws holding the strut support bearings. Once unscrewed, hold the damper with one hand and finish unscrewing with the other. Put the shock absorber to the side. In order to change the shock absorber, you must now separate it from the spring. You can find a description of the tool used in the video, which we think is most adapted to the operation. Once the shock absorber is free in the spring, you can use a 22mm offset wrench and a 6mm Allen key to unscrew the suspension strut support bearing. In the most extreme cases, you have to use an impact wrench. You can also use the specific tool used in the video, which will make your task much easier. Then remove the suspension strut support bearing assembly. Remove the shock absorber from the spring. Then remove the restraint bellows assembly. If it has fallen off during disassembly, refit the lower support to the spring. You will find the sash, parts and products used in the video in the link in the description. Take your new shock absorber. Before installing the new shock absorbers, it is necessary to prime them by pressing the shock absorber rod vertically so that the gas and hydraulic fluid are separated. Unscrew the lock nut on the stem. Position everything in the spring. Pay careful attention to place the bottom of the spring so that it supports the shock absorber flange. Then install the foam rubber bump stop. Place the bellows into the thrust bearing. Then put the entire assembly in place on the shock absorber rod. Put the strut support bearing in place with the positioning pin of the notch of the thrust bearing. And finish by screwing in the lock nut onto the shock absorber stem. Make sure it is well tightened. Unscrew the spring compression tool, paying attention to the position of the spring on the lower shock absorber support. You have now finished preparing the new part. When installing the shock absorber, the two arrows located on the strut support bearing need to be positioned at the rearmost part. Insert the shock absorber starting from the top part. Tighten the 3 screws on the shock head by a few threads. Sand and grease the inside of the stub carrier to put back the shock absorber in place easier. Using a hammer, insert a chisel into the opening of the axle stub. Thread the shock absorber base into the axle stub. The lower positioning pin of the shock absorber base must be inserted into the opening of the axle stub until the tap of the pin allows the axle stub screw to pass through. Roughly tighten the screw on the strut support bearing. Grease the end of the drive shaft. Insert the cardan shaft into the stub axle. Roughly screw the drive shaft screw back in to hold it together. Place the ball joint holder into the control arms . Then screw the nuts back on. Replace the ball joint in the pivot. Then screw it back on. Tighten the 3 screws holding the strut support bearings until they make contact. Put the sway bar link back in place. Then screw it back on. Tighten the hose clamp holding bracket. Finish tightening the shock absorber base screw. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Finish tightening each component using a torque spanner. Repeat the screwdriver technique to block the rotation of the disc so you can lock the hub nut on the disc. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Remove the wheel stud bolts. You can now repeat the operation on the other side. Put the wheels of your vehicle back on and lower it to the ground. The final tightening of the 3 strut support bearing retaining bolts is done with the vehicle on the ground and with a torque spanner. Remove the plastic cover to gain access to the shock absorber head and complete the tightening using a torque spanner. Put the plastic protection back in. Put the windscreen frame back in place. Snap the windscreen washer fluid hose back on. Replace the holding clips. Replace the seal. Reassemble the windscreen wiper arms without exaggerating when tightening them in place. Operation completed.
Hello, if this video helped you, like and subscribe.